Adapted from a canceled manga of the same name, Genocyber is a 5-part OVA released in 1994, directed by Koichi Howada, who would later go on to direct the later seasons of Ikitosen, and created by Artmic, who would later go on to direct their way into bankruptcy. Speaking of messes, let's talk about the story. Basically, it's about Elaine, a girl who was born animalistic, and her fucked up adventures starting in the distant future of the 21st century, where they fuck up Hong Kong and other places at the point of initiating a war with humanity, and it ultimately ends in the 2400s with her freezing a giant space weapon meant to kill her, and destroying it and herself in the atmosphere to save the planet. Yeah, the story is dumb. Now, some of you may be wondering what this green-looking thing is, and, well, that's the titular Genocyber. But really, it's basically Elaine's transformation after she absorbs her sister's mind and consciousness in the first part of the OVA, and uses it to wreck shit and people throughout the remaining parts. Sometimes, since she will spare others like the female doctor she meets in the second and third parts of the OVA series, and yet in the same movie/part, she will nuke an entire city and or country, despite most of the people in said place not doing anything to harm her. Yeah, okay. And that's not even getting into the harm other humans inflict on each other in this movie. Seriously, they do a lot of messed up shit to their fellow men and women here. A lot of which I can't show, sadly. Thanks, kid-friendly YouTube. Not like it's executed all that well anyway, since, at least with the version I watched, they will for the most part show the aftermath, such as them eviscerating someone and or cut out the gore/act, but other times, they will flat out show younger characters getting murdered with no cuts to the aftermath or anything, and just show the remains with no problem. And no, I didn't stutter. This is present in the OVA series, and it's also uncensored, while the adults get censored/edited for their animated murders. Yeah, fuck this movie. And you know what? Fuck the civility here. I absolutely hate that this shit with the children in such grotesque detail was fully animated and inserted into the second and third part of the OVA, as well as serving as part of a major plot point for the former. Fuck! I feel like I need some goddamn eye bleach after seeing this shit with the children in the movie. So, you know what? To prevent this rant from going on any further, I'm just gonna focus on the censorship instead. Seriously, what is with the inconsistent censorship here? Especially for stuff that should frankly be the other way around when it comes to gore in this OVA, given how many adult characters are in this, when compared to the small amount of minors in it. Oh, and even better, some versions of this film/OVA was rated PG-13, including some of the cuts that have the child murder or super gory bits uncensored. Excuse me? I'm not even against the idea of having gore, especially since this is supposed to be a horror/splatter movie. I kind of expect it in that genre, honestly, even though it makes me uncomfortable. But my issue with it here is that on top of the murdering children and showing that in graphic detail, is that it's executed so poorly in this. And it feels like they could have easily fixed this problem, but just didn't. Speaking of inconsistent, let's talk about Elaine. Is she supposed to be the main killer of this movie? Is she supposed to be a hero? Is she supposed to be neutral? Because this film can't seem to make up its mind with what they want this character to be. I know that sometimes lack of motivation is the best motivation, but this just feels like the writers couldn't decide if they wanted this character to be sympathetic or not. So they'll flip-flop between making her the main bad guy and making the humans the main bad guys. That doesn't make the character complex, that sounds like a character trying to have its cake and eat it too, and it doesn't work because these two aspects are handled so poorly and inconsistently that it only hurts the character rather than helps it. So are there any aspects about this character that I do like? Not really, because outside of that inconsistency bit, there's not really much of a character in Elaine for me to give a crap about. They're bland, forgettable, has little character arc, and even the slight one she has at the end where she freezes the space weapon feels like it comes out of nowhere considering she had a century-long war with humanity and didn't really think that her actions were wrong prior to the last 10 minutes of the OVA. And the sad thing is, Elaine is not the only character I didn't like in this. Everyone else in this movie is either an asshole with no redeeming qualities, or intrigue to them, like the scientists or cyborgs in the first part, are really bland with nothing that stands out like most of the characters in parts 2 through 5, or a slight mix of the two, like the creator of the Vajra, Sakumizu. The character element of this OVA is dog shit, and maybe making a lot of them assholes/unredeemable was the point so that it would make the viewer satisfied when they were killed off, but just because there's a reason for something, it doesn't mean I have to like it, and I don't. Either way, the character and horror element doesn't work in this film because it has a lot of problems to it. Now, like I said earlier, the story itself is something I also take issue with, largely because the story feels non-existent and bland. Maybe that was also because the main focus was on the horror element, but as I explained earlier, that doesn't even work too well, so if it was meant to to compensate for the minimal plot, it didn't work, and honestly that's a shame, because there are some interesting concepts here that could have worked if it was executed a lot better. The friendship between Elaine and the guy she meets in part 1, the Vajra slowly overtaking the entire ship and converting everyone on it into a hive mind, a giant space weapon, a mech formed from two people's mental state. All these could have been great concepts for a set of movies, or at the very least a TV show plot if they were given more time, emphasis, and or better execution. But since they are crammed into this 5-part OVA and given so little time to grow and or expand, these concepts come off as nothing more than wasted potential. What a shame. Speaking of waste, Hong Kong gets turned into a fucking parking lot at the end of the first part, and yet during the later parts of the series, no one seems to mention this event or even give a shit about its destruction. Excuse me? One of the biggest places in the Eastern world got fucking wiped, and yet people in this world treat it as important as a minor bug bite. Is this shit just an average day for these people or something? Because it kinda sounds like it. Speaking of average, the animation is fine. When they are resorting to live-action stills, the animation and fight scenes are fluid and paced decently enough. The colors and non-live-action backgrounds are decent on the eyes. Not bad, not great, just in the middle for me. And the character models are really good and consistent, as well as the designs of the cyborgs, mechs, and monsters throughout that part. Though that's probably thanks to some of the staff of this project, like Shinji Aramaki, Minoru Takanashi, and Masashi Abe, who worked on other mecha shows prior to this series. So that kinda helps. As for the music, there is one good song in this honestly forgettable and bland soundtrack, but even that song has issues, largely because it gets overplayed throughout all 5 parts. Track 10 of the soundtrack is used constantly, even in scenes that don't have Genocyber in it, to the point where it gets repetitive and tiresome to listen to. So even my favorite composed song in this OVA series isn't safe from problems I have with this OVA. That is fucking sad. Yeah, I didn't really like this OVA, and that is honestly a shame, because I really do like horror and horror movies. But this one just has so many problems to it. Fuck. Then again, this was an adaptation of something, so, you know what? Let's see if the manga is better than the anime. Well, damn, it actually is pretty good. Story is interesting, the designs are still good, I like the characters in this, and are decently memorable. Even the horror element's decently executed in this. Only issue is that most of this run was focused on the backstory of Genocyber itself, but outside of that, this is a solid read, even if the manga was never ultimately finished and or was cancelled. You have to go out of your way to find it, but if you can get your hands on this manga, especially if you didn't like the OVA and want to get a better fix for your horror/splatter kick, give the original manga by Tony Takazaki a shot. You may enjoy it. As for the OVA, toss it in the garbage. It's not worth a watch, even for riffing's sake, and the only good thing this serves as a purpose for is as a frisbee.